Welcome to Cheques and Balances. I'm Michael Vincent. This is James Blair. And this week we put some numbers, we put some facts to the age-old adage, the rumor, the myth that life in Australia is better and you should move across the ditch.
So, Mike, recently we put a post on our Instagram page. Did you know we were on the ground?
Yeah, I pop on every now and then. It's looking a lot better now that we've got Ravi running that and it's not just a super cut of your face.
I tell you what, scroll back to 2021. Ravi's tried to hide as many posts as he can. The videos are still there and they look ridiculous. So if you got nothing better to do, go and have a look. But we put a poll question up going, what would you like us to do a podcast on? Talking about Australia versus New Zealand was pretty common and probably a question we get quite a bit, right, Mike?
Yeah, and we actually have some of our customers who do move over there, especially on our side, talking about should I buy a house here before I go, all of that sort of thing. But at the moment, we've sort of had around 20,000 Kiwis per year that have moved across the ditch. We're expecting that to increase this year and the next couple of years to around about 50,000 per year. And that's mainly due to COVID border closures, people delaying their OE, housing affordability being pretty unreasonable in New Zealand. And then obviously everyone thinks there's better pay, better opportunities, that people are a little bit prettier, it's a little bit sunnier over in the sunshine part of the world.
What can I say? I am a beautiful man, and this is where I'm going to disclose my conflict of interest. I am Australian, although I'm a little bit bitter in Australia at the moment because I spent 36 hours, woke up at 3:30 in the morning to catch a flight, only to watch the mighty Parramatta Eels get whooped in the NRL Grand Final. So I might be a little bit bitter at the moment.
Was it worth missing your baby shower for, James?
Actually, to be fair, I went to the baby shower. I just left early. You know the question I hate the most is going, oh, the statement? Oh, at least you got to go there. It's like, no, it was miserable. I cried like a baby when I left. You've spent some time in Australia as well, though, haven't you, Mike?
Yeah, I lived in the Gold Coast for a little bit in Pack Pines, a sunny little suburb of the GC.
I hear there was a phase where you had frosted tips. Was that during the, I mean, you fit in really well with some frosted tips in the GC.
Oh, and a nipple ring. No, look, no frosted tips when I was in the GC. I did do a stint in Sydney for a little while as well. Shout out to Manly. Love that place.
You were above the Ben & Jerry's, right?
For a hot minute.
Yeah. Good spot. So we've got some numbers to go through. It's comparing Auckland and Sydney, kind of like for like. And we've got kind of rents and salaries and house prices. So let's run into first salaries. This was some data that was pulled together in March of 2022. So we've got Sydney first with an average net salary of $6,630 a month. Auckland with an average net salary of $4,430 a month. A very big difference. Mike, if you would do some quick math off the top of your head, what percentage is that?
It's about a 35% higher salary that you would get for the same job or a similar job in Sydney as you would in Auckland.
So that's a big number, 35%.
Yeah, and it's, but I guess when we're trying to compare apples with apples, you've really got to look at, okay, the headline salary is bigger, but is your cost of living 35% more expensive as well? Because that's really what it's going to come down to.
That's a very good point. So let's go to it. Housing. So renting a one-bedroom apartment in Sydney is $2,763 a month.
Yeah.
Renting a one-bedroom apartment in Auckland is $2,055 a month. Mike, what's it as a percentage?
Yeah, so that's about a 26% increase in Sydney than you would have in Auckland. Keep in mind, though, as we're going through this, and, I love New Zealand. I also love Sydney. I think the other thing that sort of Australia has is Sydney is a very expensive city, even in Australia. You can move to Melbourne, it will be slightly less expensive. You could move to the Gold Coast if you really wanted to, and sort of take a little bit of a hit in your culture and end up over there. And that'll be a little bit cheaper as well. But Auckland is New Zealand's most expensive city, and so is Sydney, so we'll go apples for apples.
Yep. So if you think about a 35% pay rise, if you move to Sydney hypothetically, 26% of that might be going to rent. If we were to move a little bit further out of the city, Mike, which you kind of alluded to a little bit, a three-bedroom apartment is $3,334 a month. Three-bedroom apartment in Auckland's $2,958, which is a 12% difference. So not as big if you move a little bit further out of the city.
Yeah, so you head out sort of West Penno Hills.
Oh,
great little spot.
Yep. Shout out to Auntie Jude.
So, obviously, as you move further out of the city, housing pressure is a little bit less. You're going to see that cost come down as well. But again, commuting in Sydney is very different than it is in Auckland, especially with the train lines and that sort of stuff. Something else to consider there.
So, Mr. Mortgage Broker, you love houses, you like buying houses.
Love them.
What are the median house price differences?
Yeah, cool. So in Sydney, it's about 1.6 million. In Auckland at the moment, it's about 1.15 million. And these have come back a bit. Although there was a housing boom in Auckland, there was a similar housing boom in Sydney as well. Arguably, was Auckland's a little bit worse, probably a little bit sharper, but still, debt to income, house prices, pretty similar across the ditch.
Yeah, Sydney had some pretty big jumps, right? And it was all to do with money just being so cheap, and it felt around the world that house prices moved in a lot of areas.
Yeah, so if you are looking for somewhere to move in Sydney, double pay.
Interest rates, Mike. So that's another factor. Cost of money, what's the difference?
Yeah, so around about 4.3% average interest rate in Sydney, 5.45 in New Zealand at the moment.
And when we come to basic utilities, so $203 a month in Sydney, $213 a month in Auckland. Apparently, internet's slightly more expensive in Sydney. Mike, do you think that's just because it's a bigger city that, the basic costs are a little bit cheaper in Sydney compared to Auckland?
Yeah, also population. So I think that's the other thing you've got to consider, right? There is an economies of scale with these sorts of things. So Auckland, you have a very geographically quite a large city, even on a global scale, very spread out, which presents its own set of challenges in terms of public transport and getting people into the CBD. And then the economies of scale piece. We've got just over 1 million people of Auckland. What is it, 4 or 5 million people in Sydney?
Well, yeah, I think Parramatta by itself is pretty much the size of Auckland. Parramatta is a very big area as well. What would you say in terms of, because I hear you spent a little bit of time in London. From a career perspective, I know we don't have the stats on it, but what would you say a city the size of Auckland versus a larger city overseas like a Sydney or even a London or something like that from career opportunities? Yeah,
well, look, population creates opportunity, and I think that's a really key sort of thing here. And when we're talking about 20,000 Kiwis going overseas and 50,000 Kiwis going overseas, most of them end up coming back. And it's probably a little bit different when people are moving to Australia, but, traditionally the brain drain where people go to London is you go there, you do a stint, 2 years, 5 years, something like that. You actually grow your skill set and you come back as a more productive sort of employee. And I think that's something that's quite often left out of the stats.
It's nice to be desirable.
Isn't it just?
So let's run, we've got lots of different stats here that we've been provided. Should we do a bang, bang, bang through them? Yeah, so a Volkswagen in Sydney is $32,000, $37,000 in Auckland. So 32 Sydney, 37 Auckland.
Yeah.
Staples, Mike?
Yeah, so groceries, 4.2% more expensive in Sydney, except for eggs. I find that a little tough to believe. Having been to a supermarket in Sydney, it definitely feels a bit cheaper, but the stats are the stats.
Maybe go into the bougie supermarkets.
Yeah.
We've got eating out. So restaurants prices are 11% lower in Sydney. Yeah. That's also quite interesting. For our Macca's fans out there, especially Mitch, who loves a McNugget combo, $12.87 for a combo at Macca's in Sydney versus $14 here. These are important numbers you have to keep in mind.
Hey, the Big Mac Index, right? And then the other big one, booze, so wine, $16.36 for an average bottle of wine in Sydney, $15 for an average bottle of wine in New Zealand.
So lots and lots of stats there for you. So generally, salaries, more opportunities, higher income, 35% on average, but also a lot of those living costs were quite a bit higher. So it's not just straight money in your pocket, is it?
Yeah, no, exactly. And there's also other things to consider as well, right? So think about capital gains taxes in Australia is really going to take a chunk out of your pocket. Stamp duty as well. And some Kiwis might be a little bit not so familiar with that, but that's a tax you pay when you buy a house.
What's that, a couple of percent?
Yeah, I'm not sure on the exact number, but I remember when we've looked at buying in Australia and also in London, stamp duty, they were like, oh yeah, so that'll be, £25,000. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry, do I get that back when I sell it? And they were like, no, Queen Liz gets that. Yeah.
Not anymore.
No.
So then we've got tax rates. So Australia does have their top tax rate is a higher percentage as well. So things like that you need to take into consideration. Super. So KiwiSaver versus Australian Super. This one's a very material one. There's quite a lot of tax relief and tax benefits on Super compared to there is pretty much no tax benefits with KiwiSaver. So I think it's a 15% tax rate in Australia charged on your investment returns. And there's a certain dollar figure that you get no tax on charged on in terms of contributions, if I'm correct. KiwiSaver is pretty much like any managed fund or any other investment.
Yeah. And then I think the other sort of major consideration, apart from what Australians consider culture, is it is snaky AF over there. There are snakes everywhere. There are spiders everywhere. It is horrible.
So I went to school in Australia, and have you ever seen a monitor lizard before?
Yes.
It is just a huge thing, and it can run. It can run quick. And it loves to run up trees for some reason. And if you are in the way of that monitor lizard, you're in for trouble. The other part is the long grass. I can comfortably walk around in Auckland in long grass. You are a fool if you walk around in long grass in Australia.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, I think what it sort of boils down to is, there is the headline, right? That it is the salary you're going to get in Australia is a lot better over there than it is here. But there are other considerations to take into account as well. Let's put it down to a vote. Sydney or Auckland?
I mean, I've made the choice. I'm living in Auckland. I drove 10 minutes along the waterfront to work every day. I love the size of Auckland. I love that it's a little bit less hot. If you go to the beach, depending on where you're living, I mean, coming down to the traffic point, it's a much bigger commute. Yep. And I think there's plenty of opportunities from a career perspective in Auckland.
Yeah, well, I'm voting Sydney.
Is this your resignation?
You catch that ferry from Manly around a circular quay in the morning and tell me your drive around Tamaki Drive is better than that. That is a stunning way to commute to work. I generally think, again, if you're younger, population creates opportunity, and there is much more opportunity, I would say, in Sydney than there is in Auckland.
So Cheques and Balances going forward will be James Blair and James Blair. Mike, we wish you the best of luck in Sydney. We'll wrap it up there. Thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate that question coming through via the Instagram page. If you have an idea for a podcast episode, we'd love it. Please make sure to subscribe, give us a like and review.
Cheers.